Right, I'm going to talk with a very grandiose title, I'm going to try and get out of that light, of Wales, Power Laws and the Future of Media. My attempt to take what we've learnt from the games industry, look at what it means for all media, look at what it means for the future of games, the future of records, perhaps with some crowdsourced help, the future of telly, because I'm a bit more concerned about that, surprisingly, and change the way you think about selling and making money from games with consumers. I'm sorry, it's kind of, there's been some comments which we need a bit more culture involved. I am squarely on the business side, unfortunately. Before I fully kick off, a chap at the back earlier asked this question about what do we say about Kaz Hirai's comments that in these low network penetration countries, you'll always need physical products. One of the most interesting things that I've seen happening in terms of digital distribution, it's a Lazard report which totals the online revenues in the entire world. It's a kind of guess really, but it's the best total we've got. $15 billion in 2009, $20 billion in 2010. If you want to find it, it's on GamesBrief, Google GamesBrief Lazard. The really interesting thing for me is that of those 15 billion last year, 5 billion came from China. China, the dead ground for intellectual property, the place where you can't sell content because everybody pirates it. They're a third of online revenues. And why they're a third for online revenues? Because they have adopted all the stuff I'm going to talk about and find new ways to make money which don't involve big upfront investment, don't involve big hardware costs, don't involve big distribution costs, and they become a third of the global economy. That I genuinely think is a staggering point, and that's something which people like PlayStation should be thinking very hard about. It changes the way they should be thinking about games. So, how many people were at the... oh, sorry, I've got to do the shill. That's how long it took. The shill. I'm the author of How to Publish a Game. It's a premium price product, 150 quid. I have 10 copies in my bag at the back, which I'll sell for £40 in cash today to the first 10 people. I run a business called GamesBrief. The blog is my kind of corporate marketing tool. Mainly what I do is two things. I help developers become publishers. And I work with companies like, I've done work with Atari and Square Enix, and I work with Rebellion and Farfly, who make one of my favourite games ever, which is a castle-building game called Stronghold, which they're bringing to an MMO shortly, which has now been announced. But I also help big companies understand games. The games industry has changed radically from only 5 years ago, and this new world of recurring revenues, of lower upfront costs, is fascinating to investors, as Paul told us yesterday, and to big media companies. So those are my two sets of consultancy. Do follow me on Twitter. Nicholas Lovell is a bit more scurrilous. GamesBrief is a bit less so. So pick your poison. And very excitingly, I've just been nominated for a Games Media Award, having only been running this blog for 2 years. I've never been nominated for anything before. It's really exciting. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to nobble people to vote to win. I've no idea. But if I am, consider yourself nobbled. There you go. Right. How many of you were in the debate yesterday? Most of you. Okay, I'll be really quick on this. You've heard this argument. Publishing's about content. No, it isn't. Publishers, struggling writers get paid 10% and the retailer and the publisher take 90%. Newspapers, we saw the 1585%. Games with Infinity Ward, 5,200. And of course, while you end up, that was at launch. Activision will spend a lot more on that. I agree with Ian's point that, okay, they've sold a lot of copies. Nevertheless, the myth is that publishing is about content. Publishing is about distribution. That's where publishers add value. That was my kind of point yesterday. In the old days, and that's why I put it up there, they used to add value by doing this really difficult thing of shifting all of this content around. And now I and all of you can really easily shift content around. This is a words example, magazines and newspapers. This is why particularly magazines, and particularly magazines in our industry, are suffering so badly, because anybody can start a site and spread that information very, very quickly. It's happened to records. Mainly due to Apple, but Spotify and Last.fm and other people have done that. They've challenged the distribution place, and it is unequivocally happening to games, as we've just heard. My focus on games is less on the services which Chris rightly, I think, identified as ones which are replacing the way in which you distribute a boxed product, the OnLives and the equivalents, and more about online services which are changing the nature of the gameplay itself, the free-to-play games, the browser games, the Facebook games, and so on. Personally, I believe those will end up coming to console eventually, but far too late to save the terminal decline of the console. I have a book proposal out called Death of the Console, by the way. I am deeply biased on that score. So, what is the core point? The internet has made distribution easy. Discovery is a very, very important and challenging bit. It hasn't made it the case that you simply put it out there and people find it. That is not what I'm arguing in the slightest. I actually also think there is still a role for a publisher. In the book, I talk about 4 key roles a publisher I worry about. Sales, so either taking money or selling ads, so billing or selling ads. Distribution, getting the game in front of people, literally bits and bytes from wherever they first were to wherever the consumer is. Marketing, which is raising the awareness, building purchase intent, and making people spend more money. And finance, having the money in the first place to make it happen. Those are the 4 jobs which we bundled together and gave to the publisher in return for 80% and said, you do all of that stuff, give us an advance, handle the rest of us for it. In this new world where distribution is easy, we can unpick that. We can choose which bits we give to somebody else. So, to take a really easy example, if you publish on PSN or XBLA, which you can't self-publish on, or iPhone, you give 30% of your revenue in return for 2 of those 4. Apple or Sony, they handle the distribution. You don't worry about how the code appears with your consumers. And they handle the billing. They take the money and just pay it into your account. There's a bit of me which thinks 30% for those 2 things is worth paying. It's certainly better than the previous 80%, and it leaves you 50% left over, as it were, for the marketing and for finance. It doesn't quite work like that, but you get the concept. The marketing bit's still tough. This is not the talk to go into all the different ways you can build audiences, and iGuild did it extremely well yesterday. But you still need to do those 4 jobs. You just don't necessarily need a publisher. And the key bit, I'm trying to remember what slide comes next, but the key bit was that the publisher exists to solve a problem which is no longer as big a problem as it used to be. My estimate is, or my view is that this is fantastic. The internet making distribution easy is great news for content creators. It's not so much great news for content distributors. In ballpark, half of all people who work in content distribution will be out of work. I actually think it's 5 years, not 10. We won't notice all of this because quite a lot of those people will shift over to much more the content creation side rather than the content distribution side. I also believe, not everybody does, that because it has become so much easier to distribute content, because you don't need to be a content creator to persuade a gatekeeper, a book publisher, a games publisher, a record label to let you through, more people will be able to make a living, and I mean a living, from creating content. And living is £30,000 to £100,000 a year. Many more people will be able to make a living from content creation at that level than ever used to in the 20th century. Obviously, before recorded music, there were lots of itinerant musicians who made a living that kind of way through gigging and performance before that happened. And we're returning through the internet to that kind of era. I actually think there'll be more huge superstars. There'll be more people making a living. But the people in between, the kind of so-so stuff, they're going to find it really hard. They benefited from the artificial scarcity created by the gatekeeper role. I promise you I'm going to start talking about non-game stuff at some point in all of this. So, here's my second myth-buster. All users are not created equal. And I think Sean started showing us that yesterday. We used to count how many people bought the game. And he showed us lots of slides. He says, but who's actually using it? Totally different set of demographics and gender splits and so on. We used to think, because it was the way physical distribution worked, that all users were created equal. We thought in terms of circulation or units sold or the audience or how many discs did we sell. And just to point out the total stupidity of that, the Sunday Times sells ads on the basis of its circulation. It's a CPM rate and a circulation rate. I meant to look up how the circulation is. Let's call it 1 million. I think it's less than that, but there we go. They assume when they're selling their ads that every single person who buys the Sunday Times sees every single ad. I don't know if any of you get fossil papers anymore, old dead tree papers anymore. I don't. But I can't remember the last time. Well, certainly I don't remember any of the ads, but even if I did, I never read the sports section. I never read the travel section. I turn straight to the business section. I'm not sure everybody in this room would be the same as me. The point is that though that circulation figure is clearly nonsense. What matters is users come in all sorts of different types, shapes and sizes. You have people who are just browsing, looking at stuff. You have people who are deeply engaged. You have people who are, sneezers is a Seth Godin phrase, people who influence what other people are doing, sneezers and influencers. You have people who don't care what they're doing, bad analogy with newspapers, as long as they're doing it where other people are, the socialisers. And gawkers, we're going to come back to gawkers, that's one of the most important words in the presentation so far, but you'll only realise why right at the end, unless you're very, very clever, which would be great. You also have number one fans, and number one fans are deeply, deeply dangerous to games companies. Anybody who's ever paid attention to what people say in their own forums knows exactly what I mean. I've even written a post which says the best way to build a community is to delete your forums. Forums are deeply, deeply unpleasant places filled with deeply, deeply unpleasant people who put off all of the non-deeply, deeply unpleasant people who hang out together in forums. So I think that if any of you, the real premise around that, I don't know if you heard of the phrase hazing. It's an American thing. Basically, to join a fraternity in America, Phi Beta Kappa or whatever, I don't understand that stuff, you go through a really, really unpleasant ritual. People die in hazings. I mean, they're that bad. It's heavy drinking, beatings, humiliation, you name it. And the really interesting thing is that the more extreme the humiliation, the more the people who join those fraternities value their membership to that fraternity. And there's a fantastic book, this is a deep digression, called Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me, about cognitive dissonance. And basically, it says the brain can't hold two deeply opposing thoughts. Here are the two opposing thoughts. I was incredibly stupid to go through that process. That's one thought. And the other one is, but I got something so insanely valuable that I wasn't stupid. Nobody will ever decide they were stupid. Never. So what they do is they say, well, it must be so valuable to join this fraternity that I wasn't stupid to do that. And what that means is that they want to make the future ones even worse, otherwise they were really stupid. So that process, forums, exactly the same. When you first join a forum, friendly and light. 5 years in, you turn up as a new person, you haven't had the 5-year hazing ritual of belonging. Say, hi, I'm noob, RTFM, bugger off, all that stuff. Forums are basically, create their own forms of hazing. That's a deep digression and a very personal bugbear of mine. Moving on, we're going to start talking about very, very business things. This is the world's simplest price-demand curve. It's a straight line. So what you have is price up there, demand over here. This is what people actually want to spend on your stuff. That's how much they're prepared to pay. And the historic skill of marketing was picking the number which maximised the area under the curve. And there's some people up at the top who go, I'm doing it the other way around actually. Some people down below who go, that's too expensive for me, it's not worth $40. Those are pirates and used purchases. And so to say it's worth it for me at $10, it's not worth it for me at $40. The area under that curve, that is where used gains live. And there's people up there who say, this is fantastic value. I would have paid much, much more than this, but $40 is all you can charge me. And in the era of physical distribution, you can't do dynamic pricing. You can't vary how much people choose to pay. You just had to pick the price and run with it. And okay, retailers can do special offers and so on, but basically, all consumers are treated equally in this kind of context. So, what did we do in the games industry? We had this hypothesis. I actually don't think we did it this way round. I think we tried a bunch of things, and this is the hypothesis that came up after it. If you allow users to choose how much they spend on your product, your revenues will go up. And we did this first with MMOs, and this is free to play, obviously. And rather than the $40, we're looking at the $10 price point. And what did we say? We said if you were to allow people to spend $1 here, $3 there, this is the summit of my animation skills. You spend a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, and you'll see our revenues go up because we're tapping the people underneath the sort of the price demand curve, and it's great. And it looked as if it was fantastic. Dungeons and Dragons went online. Dungeons & Dragons Online went free to play and have announced their revenues went up. It's going to come up in a minute, or maybe it isn't, 500%. I mean, that's a massive increase for that game. Lord of the Rings Online, EverQuest 2 are going free. They've both announced that. In Asia, you've seen a bunch of people transferring. EA took Battlefield Heroes from a box product to free to play. I don't know how well that went. But DDO is the one which is really, really public. And it looks as if this hypothesis that actually if you allow people to spend as little bits of money where they want to, you make more money. This is so wrong. It pains me to say how wrong it is because I was arguing that for a very long time. It's just not true. And we've started getting proper data which says what's really happening. If you want to see how wrong I am, there's a blog post called 10 Reasons Why I Prefer Microtransactions Over Subscriptions, and at least half of them are untrue. I still prefer microtransactions over subscriptions a lot. And this is why, finally, we get onto power laws, the first, all of that was preamble to the talk.